Hi, I wanted to post this video, just talk a little bit more about ASH before we make our transition into a discussion about obedience and the Milgram studies. And one of the things that I want you to make sure that you think about is, instead of just considering ASH as an experiment in conformity where we think of those that conform as failing and those that are independent as succeeding, to think about it more broadly and to consider a variety of different motivations that might be at play when a subject chooses to conform or not to conform to a group. Now, that discussion has already begun with this group, and to a large extent you've already begun to disentangle some of those different motivations and play with them a little bit in the context of what actually goes on in schools. One of the things that I think is important to consider is that for ASH, the conformity studies weren't just about whether people would conform or not. It wasn't that simple from the very beginning. ASH considered the conformity experiment to be a moral dilemma. And inherent in moral dilemmas are the concept that you're presented with a problem that doesn't have just one right solution, but rather there are at least two, perhaps multiple solutions to the problem that could be considered correct. And when we talk about correct, sometimes we talk about that being morally justifiable. But we can think about it in other ways as well. However we're defining success, however we're defining what we consider the right thing to do, that's what makes it a dilemma. So to know that ASH considered these conformity experiments to be moral dilemmas opens up the idea that there are multiple successful ways to approach this problem. Now, an analysis of the data, particularly after ASH's 1956 study, seems to confirm what many of us, I think, already understood when we looked at the data ourselves, which is that a change in actual perception is quite rare. What I mean by that is the subjects didn't, because of the group dynamic, actually see what they thought the group was seeing. They knew that the answer that they were giving when they did conform was wrong, but they chose to give that answer anyway. So I asked you to think about what are some of the different reasons that somebody might do that. And to what extent does it actually happen? Now, the ASH studies are often misrepresented. 26% never agreed with the majority. They never conformed, not on any of the questions. And only 28% of the entire group agreed more than half the time. I want you to think about those numbers. What it seems to illustrate is that while conforming happens, it happens selectively. And for many, it happened only a few times, on average about 3 times. So again, let's think about that. Among all these different trials, why would somebody go along with the group sometimes, but not continue to go along with the group every time? What's the motivation for that? So I want you to consider that, have that in the back of your mind as we begin to make our transition into thinking about obedience. I asked you specifically to consider how do we teach things like independent thinking? How do we teach or support individuation? How do we, in a school system, try to nurture students into a self-correcting peer environment where, as bystanders, for example, to things like bullying, we can develop students that have the thoughtfulness and courage to go against the group and to sanction other students for their bullying behavior. How can we do that while at the same time continuing a traditional school structure and cultural system that has quite a bit of value on conformity in some cases, and definitely on obedience. Not just in the early grades, but in some of the later grades as well. So, these ideas don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive, but I do want you to think about them in concert with each other and try to understand how they fit together, or at what points they're in conflict with each other. That'll be the goal as we transition into obedience this week. Looking forward to seeing what you come up with on the discussion board. And as always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Bye.